Hi ladies, welcome to week 4 of class. We're halfway through. Just for the record, the test that hopefully you just took, the midterm, covers the first half of the material in the class, but the final exam just covers the second half. So starting with these notes and this video, that will cover the material for the final exam. A couple of reminders. This coming week you're going to turn in a works cited page. This simply needs to list 4 sources that you're going to use in your paper. These sources should be listed alphabetically, and please use MLA or APA format for the order that the information of your source is in, and also make sure that you're using good reliable sources. Please don't use Wikipedia or encyclopedia, okay? The paper is due on the 10th of July, and this is, again, a paper where it's 3 to 5 pages. It is a formal research paper, so no personal pronouns. You do need an intro, a body, and a conclusion. You have to cite your sources as you use them in the paper, and you have to have a works cited page. The 3 to 5 page length does not include a cover page. You don't need a cover page, and it does not include the works cited page. So as far as the material this week, I will keep this somewhat brief, but again, I'm just highlighting some things, and majority of the information, all of it you can read about. You should take notes on the notes packet, so I won't talk about everything. But you're basically starting to read about the modern era and moving from the medieval era to the modern era. So some differences are the kind of global expansion that started to happen when different countries commissioned people to go and explore the world, and this really opened the door to a lot of different cultures and people and added a challenge for Christianity. Also, the little countries started to become bigger countries, and this meant that they started to focus on their own national needs and their identity as a nation. Also, individualism was started to be heralded, where before this time they kind of saw themselves as a member of a group, and as a group they survived. Now they started to focus on themselves as individuals and their individual needs. There were new countries popping up that had a new form of government that was democracy, and so kind of starting to put an end to monarchies and dictatorships. And there was a new kind of interest in nature and science, and the whole kind of intellectual movement started to happen again. And these things kind of led to the Renaissance. The word Renaissance means rebirth, and basically there was a Renaissance in the North and in the South. The Northern Renaissance was more of an intellectual Renaissance, and the Southern one dealt with art and literature, culture, okay? So basically, some individual people, because of that individualism and nationalism I just spoke about, started to become wealthy. An example of this is the Medici family in Florence, Italy. And with some of their excess money, they started to commission artists to paint and sculpt all sorts of different things. The people of the time became real interested in the classics, Greek, Latin, which included the Bible and Bible stories. And so a lot of those ancient Greek pieces of literature or Latin or the stories from the Bible started to be depicted in art and in sculpture. And of course, this was in the South, primarily starting in Florence, Italy, spreading out through Italy. This is known as the Renaissance, and I'm sure you've seen some famous Renaissance artwork. It's all very realistic. They paid great attention to detail and tried to get it anatomically correct, tried to really highlight the beauty of the human body and really highlight some of these stories of faith. One thing that happened in the North was the invention of the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg invented this. In the year 2000, they made a list of the 1,000 most important inventions, and the printing press was listed as number 1. And you can imagine how this revolutionized things for people. Most people were not literate, and the religious leaders basically read the Bible to the people, explained the Bible to the people. But suddenly, when the Bible was in print, they could read it themselves and start thinking for themselves. And of course, the Bible was the very first thing printed on the printing press and is the most published piece of work still today. One thing that was a big deal at the time from a faith perspective were cathedrals. The cathedral was kind of an example of how they viewed the entire world and universe that they lived in, with sort of the dome of the cathedral being the heavens, which is why you'll see so many domes during the Renaissance that were painted with these kind of heavenly visions or pictures. And then they kind of were aspiring to get to the top. In the north, though, again, this Renaissance was more of an intellectual one. And again, that's where the printing press was invented. And so people really started to study and learn how to read and just start to think for themselves a little bit more. And this is where a person who became very important was living. And this is Martin Luther, and he was living in Germany. Martin Luther was this very bright man. He was going to be a lawyer. One day he got caught in this terrible thunderstorm. He was struck by lightning, and he prayed that if he were saved or spared, that he would become a monk. So he joined the Augustinian order, and he became this very dedicated monk. And as he was practicing his monastic life, and as a priest, he started to become concerned with some of the things he saw happening in the church. During the Renaissance, a lot of the popes became a little bit corrupt. They became a lot more interested in money and affluence and leisure and having a really expensive lifestyle, and a lot less concerned about spirituality and religion. And because they weren't really governing the church, there were some abuses. And so Martin Luther had several concerns, and I'm about to highlight several of them. I'll try to do this as quickly as I can, but one of the things he was concerned about is this idea of how we're saved. And in the Catholic Church, we say that you're saved by both your faith and your works. And Martin Luther believed that you were saved by your faith alone. He also believed or saw a lot of teachings in the church that weren't rooted in the Bible, and he believed all teachings of the church should come straight from the Bible. And he had more of a literal approach to reading the Bible. He also was concerned with the authority that the Pope held, and he didn't see necessarily a scriptural foundation for that. He also didn't agree with all 7 sacraments of the church, and really only saw 2 of them as valid, baptism and Eucharist, because Jesus himself participated in those 2. And a really big concern he had that was really a big problem at the time was the selling of indulgences. An indulgence was sort of like your way of paying for your sins, and it was usually done more in your actions, in like prayers that you did or maybe pilgrimages that you made. But it became a practice among some priests, not all of them, that they would sell these indulgences and basically say, give me money, you don't need to do anything on earth, your sins will be forgiven, and you can either spend little time in purgatory or skip purgatory altogether, or if you want to pay me money, I can get your aunt or uncle who are in purgatory out of there quickly. And you can see how that would become abused. And 2 people, Albrecht of Mainz and Johann Tetzel, were 2 of the priests that were near Martin Luther that were practicing this, and he really saw that as a problem. So his response to this was to post a list of his grievances, known as the 95 Theses. This was written originally in Latin because that was the educated language, and posted on the church door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany. And this sounds kind of rebellious, but that wasn't that uncommon at the time. If you had something you wanted to argue in a theological way with someone who's educated, then you would post your complaints, and then they would set up a time with you to publicly debate those things. But the big difference was that someone took his list, translated it into German, and then used the printing press to print it and to kind of get it out to people. And a lot of lay people agreed with Martin Luther. The church, however, disagreed. And so after several different debates and stuff, then they gave Martin Luther 60 days to recant what he preached. He refused to recant his teachings and therefore was eventually excommunicated. Now, Martin Luther, a Catholic priest, did not set out to start a whole new religion. He set out to reform the Catholic Church. But the response to this was that a new religion was formed based on his teachings, which was called Lutheranism. And then you're going to read in your book about a few other different reformers of the time. The first 2, Ulrich Zwingli and John Calvin, were 2 people who agreed with most of what Luther said, but disagreed on a few key issues, so they started their own churches. One was in Zurich, Switzerland, the other in Geneva. And then you'll also read about Henry VIII and a Reformation that happened in England. And this was all because Henry VIII had married a woman named Catherine of Aragon. They were married quite a few years, but she had failed to give him a male heir. And so after, I think, 23 years of marriage, he wanted to have their marriage annulled, and the Pope refused to do that. So he separated from the Catholic Church, formed the Anglican Church, and the Anglican Church was almost identical to the Catholic Church, except that you could divorce your wife. One thing that also happened with Henry VIII is that within 5 years of starting the Anglican Church, he took all of the land from all of the Catholic monasteries and kicked all of the monks that owned that land out and just took over that land for himself, which was a huge deal. So anyway, you're going to read about the things that led to these reformations, the different things that they had in common and what they thought of that was different, and some of the kind of associates to these reformers that helped advance their religions. So anyway, also I wanted to remind you, I sent an email about this, but you do not have to do discussion number 3. So this week, the only thing that's really due is the works cited page, and you'll have to take the quiz. You also have until Sunday the 8th to complete the midterm. Thank you.